Wonderful. Thanks so much. So as we begin the webinar, From Land to Sea, Building Sustainable Maritime Futures, we extend our thanks to everybody attending. We're watching the recording later, and especially to all of our amazing presenters that are sharing with us tonight, with our great tech help from Neil Anderson, and everybody that helped promote this event. And on that front, we just want to give a special thanks to sharethecities.org and also to the UW School Marine and Environmental Affairs. So thank you for helping make sure people can get here tonight. We also extend our gratitude and acknowledgement to the Coast Salish peoples, the original caregivers to these lands and waters where much of our work takes place. And the responsibility to protect and live in right relation with the ecosystems around us has been going on since time immemorial and continues to go on to this day. I'm excited to introduce our presenters and our co-hosts. Feel free when I say your name if you want to like wave and let people see you there. But we have a lot of great presenters here tonight. We have Eric Ross on behalf of ShipItZero campaign. We have some great folks from Climate Action Families. We have Rusty West and Joey Jacobowitz. I apologize if I didn't get your last name right. Ruby Webb and Ruby Tate, Celia Waite, and Emily Durkin. We also have Dr. Anne-Marie Dooley on behalf of Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, and Elizabeth Burton for Seattle Cruise Control, Jess Rojas on behalf of Pacific Coast Coalition of Seafarers, and Miranda Marty for 350 Seattle Maritime Solutions team. And we'll begin tonight with presentations by each organization, and then that'll be followed by the panel Q&A. So please, again, feel free to drop questions in the chat at any time. We'll try to get to them. And we're going to go ahead and start off our presentations tonight with Eric with the ShipItZero campaign. So I'll turn it over to you, Eric.
Thank you, Stacy, and thank you to all of you for the work that you do in the world. We're part of a larger movement, and that was one of the inspirations for this webinar, is to kind of like figure out, what's the linkages with the puzzle pieces of who's doing this amazing, important climate justice work. So I wanted to start us off with a quick video fresh off of an action yesterday, give you just a little bit of a taste for the flavor of kind of what ShipItZero is. So provided technology cooperates with us, you'll be able to see this. And away we go.
ShipItZero, ShipItZero, ShipItZero now. Ho, ho, ho! I'm Santa Claus, and we're here at Target headquarters to ask them to deliver zero-emission ships by 2030. Target, granting our wish would be a truly special gift that future generations will cherish. The gift of breathable air, freedom from pollution, and a habitable planet. On behalf of tens of thousands of people across this world, we present to you our holiday wish list. Will Target deliver? ShipItZero!
All right, so what is ShipItZero and why does it matter? So ShipItZero is a climate justice campaign launched in July, founded by coalition partners Stand.Earth, as well as Pacific Environment, and endorsed by several port community organizations, including groups like 350 Seattle. And so much of our work is a collaboration. And why is this issue important? I'm just gonna switch our screen share here. All right, so why do we organize these silly events wearing sailor hats and whatnot? Well, ShipItZero is sounding the alarm on dirty ship pollution. And I don't know about you all, but I think for many people, myself included, this issue has largely sailed under the radar of public scrutiny and climate policy. One of the things I think that's important to know about cargo shipping pollution They burn some of the dirtiest fuels out there. It's like the bottom of the barrel. It's subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. Ships, they pollute our air. Ships harm our health. Ship pollution, in fact, cargo ship pollution is linked to 6.4 million childhood cases of asthma annually.
Thank you.
Seattle has, in fact, 2 times the global average of early deaths due to air pollution from our ports and cargo ships. In short, ship pollution shortens our lives. And communities like Georgetown and South Park, nearest to our port, they have up to 13 years shorter life expectancy than wealthier parts of Seattle. And, I have to ask the question, what is this ship pollution doing to our Earth? Well, it's cooking our climate. And who's accountable for their ship pollution? Well, unfortunately, ship emissions are not accounted for in our Paris Climate Agreement. And shipping pollution has a huge impact. Shipping pollution from retailers, companies like Amazon, IKEA, Target, it's worse than 2 billion diesel trucks. So what do we do about that? Well, our demand is to ditch dirty ships and pivot to 100% zero emissions by 2030. We have immediate goals right now and financial commitments that can be made. And who are we asking to do that? Well, we're targeting corporations, retailers like IKEA, Amazon, Walmart, and Target. And our theory of change behind this is that these retailers, they have a brand image that they want to upkeep. And if we bruise that brand image, they're more likely to adhere to our demands. And so we pressure them, linking their brands with the toxic emissions, the climate devastation caused by ship pollution. And we've already seen a lot of success. Since launching this campaign in July, IKEA, we did a petition delivery outside IKEA and in their headquarters, and they're now meeting regularly with the ShipItZero campaign, and they quietly shifted their stance on biofuels. And what are the possible solutions for shifting to zero emissions technology? Well, it comes from renewables, and that's part of our demands. So additionally, Amazon, since launching the campaign, has committed to zero emission shipping. Unfortunately, it's not good enough. They committed to zero emission shipping by 2040, but they've denounced false solutions like biofuels and LNG. And other victories since then have come about as a result of fun, festive, lively campaigns organized and attended by many of the folks that are on this call. And I just want to express my deep gratitude for you all. And we have a lot of actions and events coming up in the near future. We've had some amazing partnerships too with groups like Climate Action Families, which you'll be hearing from just shortly. So we've done actions outside of Amazon's headquarters. We've done actions inside Amazon's headquarters, in fact, delivering a mock cargo ship to their reception area. And inside that mock cargo ship, or cargo container, I should say, was a petition signed by 20,000 people from port communities and other communities who care about this issue. And after Amazon announced that they were going to show some climate leadership, albeit not good enough, we also did action upstaging their CEO outside the Climate Pledge arena. We were in fact 10 feet from CEO Andy Jassy, upstaging him, making sure that the ShipItZero campaign, our demands for 100% zero emission shipping by 2030 was at the top of their mind. So I'm really excited to partner with you all for future actions, and so grateful to the many organizations that are doing such amazing work. We're part of a larger collective movement. And with that, I wanted to turn it over to Joey and Ruby and Rusty of Climate Action Families. Joey, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Okay. Hello, one and all. I am Joey Jacobowitz, a climate justice ambassador of Climate Action Families. We've been around in Seattle for 8 years. I've been around for 6 or 7 of those, doing all sorts of climate work with a focus on supporting and empowering youth like myself to fight for the climate. We've done a ton of stuff, planting trees, training kids, running rallies, talking to politicians, which is both my favorite and least favorite climate action, and more. One of our recent actions was the Amazon teach-in, where we partnered with ShipItZero. That was how me and Eric met. Some of their own youth will be discussing that in more detail in a minute. If that sounds fun, and you are a kid or have a kid, let us know. Specifically, let our awesome secretary Rusty know. He'll answer any questions you put into chat or send him via email. Thanks for being here, and thanks for listening. Next up should be the details on that teach-in that I mentioned. Eric?
Good morning, and welcome to the teach-in on climate change and cargo shipping pollution for Amazon. Our learning goal is for Amazon to step up and be a leader on maritime shipping pollution. That means Amazon committing to 100% zero emissions ships by 2030, not 2040.
Just one container ship can produce as much pollution as 50 million cars. Just 15 of these mega-sized cargo ships match the toxic emissions from all the cars in the world.
Amazon's net income, its profit, was $29.4 billion, a 123% increase from the previous year.
Today, Amazon executives are making short-sighted decisions without care for the well-being of youth who will be burdened with their ship pollution. Amazon's lack of leadership today is an injustice to the leaders of tomorrow. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can live longer and healthier lives by ditching dirty ships. We can protect our climate and communities by switching to cargo ships that use renewable energies, not fossil fuels.
For failing to take immediate steps, we give you an F. For your overall grade, we give you an incomplete. There is more work to be done, and we're counting on you to do it.
Amazon, you're hurting a lot of people and you're hurting our future. Stop using fossil fuel and transition to zero-emission technology.
If you all enjoy that, you like youth showing leadership, show some love in the chat or put some hearts up. And Ruby, you're joining us as well. Do you want to speak a little bit about your experiences recently?
Yeah, so I'm Ruby Webb. I use they, them pronouns. I'm in 7th grade on Lemminuksak land, Bellingham, and I've been participating in the ShipItZero meeting since September, and we've been planning that action in Seattle at Amazon's headquarters. A detail that really stood out to me about that action was when we were giving our speech to Amazon at the front desk, and the guy who they had sent up there to be the face of Amazon kind of looked down when we were talking to him, because it's kind of scary talking about climate change and stuff, because we're destroying the planet and destroying humanity, and people sometimes choose to ignore that because it's easier. But we it felt like they were really making positive change by banding together and stuff. And sorry, I felt like we were making positive change by looking Amazon in the eye and telling them about all the effects that their actions have on community and the world, and asthma cases and premature deaths. And yeah, it was just really powerful to do that action for me.
Thank you, Joey and Ruby. It's been just such a joy to work with you all, and there's a host of other amazing climate justice organizers with climate action families, and I think they're always looking for support. It's really important that adults show up and support the next generation of organizers. Joey, Ruby, Rusty, is there anything else you want to say before pivoting to the next presenter?
Well, I'll just kick in the fact that we really appreciate, Climate Action Families really appreciates the leadership of so many great organizations. 350 Seattle, we worked with off and on for 8 years. Stand.Earth with various programs, including the ShipItZero campaign right now that Eric is representing. And it's really been wonderful for our young people to have the opportunity to work with the adults in these organizations to come together with a real collaborative effort. So thank you all for that.
Agreed and seconded.
Thank you all. And if you have some questions for Climate Action Families, feel free to jot those down. We'll have a great Q&A later on. Back to you, Stacy.
Oh, thanks so much. Oh, that videos were so great. I always love, just kind of makes you feel like you were there a little bit, even though you didn't get to go. So thank you all. And I think next we'll go ahead and we'll turn over to Anne-Marie with Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility.
Gosh, I hesitate. That was so brilliant. I hesitate to bring back the conversation down to public health. I have a couple of slides that hopefully will appear on your screen. And there we go. So I'm Anne-Marie Dooley. I'm a doctor and a board member of Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. I'm going to focus on a fairly narrow aspect of the maritime industry, which is very, very broad, cruising. I've testified a couple of times to the port on cruise ships on the public health effects of them. And I'm going to expound a little bit more tonight because I have some more time. So I'm going to bring your attention to this picture in front of you, and you'll see beautiful pristine mountains and waters and a large ship with a very prominent plume of smoke coming from the stack. And that's one of the obvious public health problems with cruise ships is the various toxic chemicals, sulfur oxides, and small particulate matter, including black carbon that blows downwind, not just affecting the workers who have to deal with docked ships, but also people who live downwind in communities that, of course, have been adversely affected by pollution for many, many years. I'm going to bring your attention to the body of the ship itself. If you look at it, you know, I've heard descriptions of cruise ships as floating cities, but they're not really any floating city that I'm as familiar with, because most cities that we're familiar with have public governance. Cruise ships are private or corporate governance, and especially that means the workers on these ships have very little recourse if things go badly wrong. And we know what happened with COVID last year when many workers were exposed to public health nightmares that they'd never seen, had life-threatening. And then tens of thousands of workers were stranded on ships even after all the passengers have left for months. If you drop your eyes again to the waterline, there's another public health aspect which is somewhat invisible to somebody who looks at a cruise ship, and that, of course, are emissions below the waterline, which include, you know, sewage, wastewater from sinks containing cleaning chemicals, and of course, bilge water and other things. And I'm going to talk about those in a little bit more detail. Next slide. So air is the obvious one. You saw in that last photo was the plumes of smoke coming out. You know, the Puget Sound Air Agency gives numbers on, for maritime pollution is about 20 to 25% of all air pollution, which is a really high number for the Puget Sound area. That agrees a little bit with a study that was done in 2020 on cruise ships. There's very few studies in Barcelona which also point to about 20%. But in the Mediterranean, they reckon that passenger traffic is about 10% of all emissions, which is huge. And what are these emissions? Well, they're kind of nasty stuff. You know, they use very, very cheap fuel oil, which I will say cheap, but it's not really cheap because the costs are passed on to us and to workers in terms of cardiovascular disease from inhaling sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, ozone, small particulate matter, and this awful black carbon, which is really just small particulate matter that's very easily inhaled into the lungs and passes into the blood. Hence the increased incidence of heart attacks and premature death. About 200,000 people die of air pollution in the United States every year. And it's actually very hard to put a number on this because, people come in with heart attacks, they come in with lung disease, they don't have, air pollution stamped on their death certificate. So the cruise industry is coming up with solutions that they claim are solutions, which are things like scrubbers to remove sulfur dioxide from the air coming out and putting it into water, and then pushing that water into the ocean. Now, in the 80s, you probably don't remember, but we had sulfur combining with air from coal plants dropping on the forests across Northern Europe and killing forests. So I don't think discharging sulfur into the Puget Sound and Salish Sea at large is really going to help marine life or public health. Natural gas also has been proposed as another solution, is somehow that it's a clean fuel, but methane gas from start to finish is toxic. Now, we have traded the health of Black, brown, poor communities, indigenous communities from the start of fracking all the way to where it's delivered, and it's not a solution. It causes people to die. Next slide. Last slide, I'm going to bring you back to that picture of the ship below the waterline. So many of these cruise ships, and I'm sure Elizabeth Burton will talk a little bit more, discharge, what I'm worried about most is sewage into the water. And they're actually allowed to do this if they're a certain distance out from the shoreline. But to be honest, since it's not a real city, a cruise ship, and there's no public health department watching, we have no idea most of the time what's been discharged into the water. Carnival have been fined every single year for discharging wastewater. And Holland Cruise Lines discharged 22,000 gallons of sewage, raw sewage into the water back in the early 2000s. So raw sewage conceals all sorts of nasty bacteria. You'll see them on that slide. They can, we've known since the 1850s that bacteria in the water cause things like cholera that causes severe illness. They can also get into shellfish. They can get onto the beaches and cause severe illness. So the cruise ships really need to clean up, but there is sustainable solutions. You can treat water. You can possibly not discharge it at all. Norway is a leader in this. And I wish that Seattle and the Puget Sound could be a leader. They've actually banned ships by 2026. They have to be all zero emission propulsion, which I think is amazing. And that actually the Norwegian government think that's possible. That would clean our air and clean our water and would be a fantastic solution. And I think the Puget Sound and Washington State could do this. It would create certainly a lot of much cleaner jobs in our maritime industry, clean up our air, clean up our water, and not have people ending up in the hospital with lung disease and cardiovascular problems. And that's it for me. I think Elizabeth Burton's next.
Okay, thank you. Neil, can we go ahead and start the slides? So I'm Elizabeth Burton. I'm speaking on behalf of Seattle Cruise Control. And the slides will start up here in just a minute. Okay, yes, so here we are. Next slide, please. So Seattle Cruise Control came together 2 years ago. Some concerned citizens founded it. We're opposed to expansion of cruise in Seattle. And you can tell some of the reasons why we might be opposed to cruise from the excellent presentation that Dr. Dooley just gave. We were particularly concerned about the plans to build a third cruise terminal at Terminal 46 opposite Pioneer Square. So that's something that Port of Seattle announced back in a couple of years ago. We have recently expanded our vision to not only oppose the third cruise terminal, but actually to work toward a cruise-free Salish Sea. So those of you who are not familiar with cruise ships already got a great introduction from Anne-Marie. I can tell you, I'm going to tell you a little more. The cruise ship activity in Seattle is bigger than most people are aware of. So this is so this slide shows the two existing cruise terminals. Those are where the gold stars are. Terminal 91 in Magnolia, Smith Cove, and then Pier 66 in downtown Seattle at Bell Street. So those have been in operation for a number of years, and the plan was to build yet another cruise terminal where the Blue Star is at Terminal 46. The plans to build the terminal at 46, cruise terminal at 46 have been put on hold. You probably know that all cruising was shut down for a while because of the pandemic. And so those plans are now on hold. The fate of Terminal 46 may be determined within the next few months. We have some information that says the first quarter of 2022, they're going to decide what to do. Okay, next slide, please. So the context here is that Seattle is the home port. That's the port where the cruises start and end for about half the cruises to Alaska. 2019 was the last year prior to the pandemic. Things were booming. We had over 200 ship calls, almost 600,000 passengers, distinct passengers. And of those passengers, the vast majority of them, between 80 and 90%, flew here to start their cruises and then flew home afterwards. So in 2019, this was almost 500,000 people taking flights home to Seattle and back to get on cruise ships, to go to Alaska and back. So one of the, there are a lot of problems with cruise ships, and one of them is burning all that fossil fuel. Both cruise ships and airplanes are intensive fossil fuel burners. Next slide, please. So we've done calculations that show for the 2019 season, which was 6 months long, 2019 cruise season in Seattle, if you add up the greenhouse gas emissions from the cruise ships and the airplanes that were associated, that brought the passengers here, it adds up to almost 2 million tons, which is about a third as much as was emitted by everything in the city of Seattle for an entire year. So this is for a non-essential activity in the midst of a climate crisis. This is a non-trivial contribution to climate change. Climate change, as you've already heard, is not the only problem with cruise ships. Next slide, please. So, and this is not a complete list of the problems with cruise ships. So the first one, yes, fossil fuel intensive, they're bad for the climate. Anne-Marie Dooley just went into why the air emissions are harmful for human health. So there's greenhouse gas emissions, but there's also these toxic other emissions that directly give people diseases. You will hear more about worker exploitation probably in the next presentation, but I'll just say, we know that workers on cruise ships have low salaries, very harsh and sometimes unsafe working conditions. They're on board 24/7 for months at a time. And as was mentioned, thousands of them were stranded on their ships, unable to get home or even communicate with people at home during the pandemic. Marine life is impacted by noise pollution and ship strikes. Our orcas use sound to find food and find where they are and get oriented, and the noise pollution from ships is very detrimental to them. Ships dump, among other things, plastic garbage, engine waste, and human waste. Cruise ships actually account for only about 1% of global shipping, but 25% of shipping waste. And as we're all aware now, with the advent of COVID, they are great spreaders of viral illness. So in addition to COVID, they are regularly spread seasonal flu and many other diseases as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I appreciate what Dr. Dooley said about floating cities. I think calling them floating cities is just an attempt to give people the sense of how big they are. But I agree, they don't have not a lot of public control over their activities. So most of the cruise ships that came to Seattle carry from 3,000 to over 4,000 passengers. And so this slide is just to give you a sense of how big they are. And one cruise ship in, just a minute, Okay, we'll just go on. Next slide, please. So what Seattle Cruise Control has done, these are some of the things that we've been doing. So we participate in demonstrations. This was a demonstration that we participated in with many other local groups. It was on Earth Day last April to celebrate a year of a Salish Sea free from cruise ships because of the pandemic shutdown. And you can see there's a pot of happy dolphins there. We also do research, education, we give testimony at Port Commission meetings and elsewhere, and we network with many other groups, both locally and internationally. There's a group throughout the world called Global Cruise Activist Network that we're involved with. Next slide, please. Yes, so we've had a couple successes. The future of cruise turned out to be an issue in the recent elections for port commissioners. We were happy to see that. And as I mentioned, the new cruise terminal has been paused indefinitely. We hope it will be paused permanently. That, of course, was not all our doing. We have the pandemic to thank for part of that. Next slide. So there's a number of ways to get involved. We have a great Twitter account. You can fill out a volunteer form, in which this is the address to do that. And I think Stacy's probably putting it in the chat. And you can join our listserv to stay up to date. Next slide. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Yeah, let's go ahead and we'll hop over next to Jess Rojas and the Pacific Coast Coalition of Seafarers.
Great. Hi, everyone. I've been so agitated and inspired by all y'all's work as I was over here listening. So super excited to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and try to move it into full screen mode. Give me 1 second. Full screen mode. Cool. Great. Thank you all so much for having me here. I'm Jess Rojas with the Pacific Coast Coalition for Seafarers, and just really excited to share a little bit about our work. As a few folks have already talked about, I'm really going to be focusing in on the workers on these ships that we've been talking about, and some have already really brought up some of the main issues that the workers have been experiencing, but wanted to share a little bit more about our organization and what we're doing to show and extend solidarity between land and sea with the workers, on these ships. So PCCS, also known Pacific Coast Coalition for Seafarers, is a coalition of local organizations dedicated to supporting seafarers with their basic physical and social needs. Our vision is to build unity between sea and land in communities in solidarity with seafarers. Our mission is to enjoin community members and organizations along the Pacific Coast to generate resources and foster solidarity, to uphold the dignity, rights, and welfare of seafarers. Because as you heard, and then I'm going to share a little bit more about, seafarers are some of the most exploited, invisible, essential workers in the world, and are responsible for bringing us everything from our computers that we're on right now so that we can participate in this Zoom call, to our cell phones, to our food, to, we just talked about all of the many different ways. And within that, they're on these ships that we just talked about that are emitting these toxic chemicals in order to allow for our global commerce to happen. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what they're experiencing. For those that don't know, I want to give kind of like a basic rundown of who a seafarer is. So as many of you know, it's 90% of our world trade is carried by ship, which means all of these emissions that we are talking about globally. There's over 50,000 merchant ships. So as we're talking about the pollution that's going into our world and causing the climate crisis, or contributing to the climate crisis, we understand that that is there. However, in order for those ships to run, they are ran by seafarers. And the seafarers are the people responsible for maintaining, running, and operating the fleet. So there's over 1.6 million seafarers worldwide, and majority of seafarers originate from the Philippines, China, Indonesia, the Russian Federation, and Ukraine. And these workers really have to leave their homes and families in order to earn money that can be sent home to their spouses, children, and parents. We'll talk a little bit more of why individuals decide to go into seafaring, but oftentimes it's due to the conditions in their home countries, dealing with poverty, not having access to adequate living wages. And as some already shared, seafarers are often away for 9 to 12 months at a time. However, I'm going to share a little bit more about how during the pandemic that has been extended, and we've seen news reports around this. Seafarers, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we talked about a few of the times that already here in this webinar of how we've seen in the news how workers have been stranded at sea. Seafarers during this pandemic are struggling to access really basic necessities. So as the Pacific Coast Coalition for Seafarers, we actually go and visit ships. And part of our goal is to check in on the welfare of the seafarers on the ships, to see how what the conditions are on the cargo ships and eventually the cruise ships. We didn't visit this past season due to the pandemic. However, in future years, we're planning to visit the cruise ships as well. And as we said, seafarers often are facing things such as wage theft, long separation from their families, working long hours, hazardous conditions, harassment, workers' rights abuses, and contractualization. And so within that, seafaring is actually considered the second most dangerous job in the world. This is due to many of the just the conditions around working. Oftentimes when you look at the research on what specifically seafarers are down, fatigue is actually the number one. So you look at long working hours, it said that a seafarer sleeps an average of like 5.2 hours per night, which means they're stuck on this ship out in the middle of the sea. They're not able to actually rest. They're being exploited. They're only getting paid, I think the average for a pay for seafarers is $36 a day when they're working these long hours. And because their working environment is out at sea, and the agent that actually hires them isn't actually the company that owns the ship that's moving the cargo. If they are to be exploited, if they don't have access to good food, if they don't have access to clean water, there's actually no way, the only way for them to actually report those issues is to try to contact the shipping agent, when in reality, they don't actually typically have access to internet or a way of communicating that's more regularized. They may have access, but oftentimes they have to pay for it while on the ship, and or just don't have as much. The ship itself actually controls how much seafarers are allowed to be on there. We see the different ways that seafarers have been exploited by the shipping companies. And in particular, during the pandemic, we've seen how seafarers are frequently stranded at sea and being forced to work on vessels months beyond their contracts due to our government, due to their home country government's slow response to taking responsibility for their safe return home, and companies taking advantage of this situation during the pandemic and illegally extending contracts past the maximum 12 months a seafarer can be expected to serve on board, which is under the which is an international maritime convention law. We've actually seen, as a part of the PCCS, we go and visit seafarers here on ships in the port of Seattle. I believe it was just this was in the past 2 to 3 weeks. We met a crew that actually hadn't been off ship for the past 17 months. So again, this is happening right at our own port. We've heard of seafarers being at sea for up to 18 months. And what's I think enraging about this whole story is some of the shipping companies, theoretically, if your contract keeps getting extended, that means you don't have access to your family. You may not be able to connect with them when you thought so. You may not actually be able to tell your family that you're not showing up when you said you were going to show up. So that communication breakdown due to not having full access to internet and being able to communicate with your families back at home. What we've seen here is this is just an increase in profits to the shipping companies. So when you do the research, although seafarers are getting paid $36 a day, these shipping companies have actually exponentially made more money during the pandemic because of the increase in demand for different supplies throughout the pandemic. And so it's not that the shipping companies actually don't have the funds to be able to change the crew. It's that they're taking this as an opportunity to exploit the workers, blaming it on the pandemic to further exploit and increase their profits as a whole. And really, we view seafarers as the frontline workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. They've been the invisible essential workers that are helping to get our commerce across. But because of that, they've been the hardest hit. Again, being stranded at sea for months and literal ports being closed, and then literal access to being able to be vaccinated. A lot of times what is being said is they're not allowed off of the ships because of not having access to vaccines, when only 25% of our global seafarers have actually been vaccinated. Here in Seattle, Discovery Health and a number of other groups had been working to provide vaccines to seafarers. But I know from visiting, I went down to Portland to volunteer with PCCS there, where our organization started, and we were visiting that ship, and the vaccine was actually supposed to be free, but when I was actually talking to the workers after the captain left, the workers said that they had to pay $50 in order to actually get their vaccine, when the local government had already said that it was the shipping company's responsibility to pay for this. However, under the table, the shipping company was actually charging the seafarers. You think about that, that's a day and a half's work just to have access to a vaccine while here. And the seafarers themselves didn't want us to report it because they wanted to ensure that they could get their vaccine because it's such a hot commodity. But I will say that even within Seattle, we've been visiting with seafarers who have their vaccines and are still not allowed off the ship. And so we just further see how shipping companies are really utilizing this as an opportunity to further exploit the workers. And wanting to connect it to what we were talking about here, we got a chance to work with 350 Seattle and really thinking through how fossil fuels in these shipping companies and the ships themselves, we often think about those that are living in the port city and the impact that that has on the health of the people on land, but it also impacts the health of actual workers on the ships. And there's been surprising very little research done on the air quality on board of the ships. But because of exposure to air pollution and that being correlated with many health outcomes, including poor outcomes from COVID-19, and specifically like a lot of the things that seafarers often die from, which is cardiovascular disease and cancer, hypertension, and then pandemic and epidemic diseases, which we just talked about. Like we said, the health outcomes of seafarers it makes it one of the most dangerous professions in the world. However, we rely on these invisible migrant workers in order for our society to run as a whole. I'll share a quick story and then kind of move into what we're doing about this in ways that you could get involved. In addition to being away from home, we've seen that the mental health outcomes of seafarers is at an all-time low during the pandemic. I went to visit a ship and was talking with a crew over lunch, and they just said, thank you so much for visiting. We've only seen the same 25 faces, so for the cargo ships, there's actually only 25 individuals on the ship that run the entire ship. And within that, they were saying that when you see the same people for the past year, 6 months at a time, it starts messing with your mental health, and you're not able to connect with your loved ones as often as you would like. And it's seen that suicide rate at sea is 15 times higher than the suicide rate of those on land. And like I said, recent studies specifically focus around fatigue, boredom, and diseases as depression is really common amongst seafarers. And oftentimes seafarers are exposed to post-traumatic stress disorder. And so in addition to the physical health impacts, the mental health impacts are also very at play. And this particular seafarer, when I was talking to him, he actually said this. He's like, a lot of people commit suicide. Sometimes there's actual murder due to the mental health conditions that are happening on the ship itself. And so when I asked him what he does during those times, he said being able to see a face that's different than our own. So having ship visitors such as those with PCCS is really helpful, because then you're talking to somebody new, you're seeing a new face, you're being reminded of this world that's outside of the ship. His other way of coping was to literally watch movies while on the ship. And I think that's part of the vision of PCCS, and is showing solidarity and showing up to be with seafarers and understanding their conditions so that we can fight for their solidarity on land and fight for their workers' rights that they deserve. So part of what we're doing in partnership with 350 this holiday season is really asking our communities to help give back to the essential workers that are bringing our holiday gifts. Because seafarers don't have access to shore leave at this time, we're inviting individuals to donate either items or monetarily donate as well, items that seafarers have asked for. So literally basic things such as toothbrush, toothpaste, shampoo, soaps, deodorant, warm clothing, jackets, hats, gloves. We actually learned from seafarers that some of these things they might have access to, but they actually have to purchase it from the shipping company themselves, which means that it's much higher prices. They don't necessarily have full access. And so being able to bring them some of these basic supplies actually really brightens their day. And so we'd invite you, if you'd like to, at this end of year, to adopt a seafarer at $10 each. Right now, we're visiting cargo ships with the cruise industry, or with the cruise ships not being able to be visited or not currently in port. And so to adopt an entire cargo ship is $250, and there's some different ways, and I can share those in the chat box. I'm happy to share a little bit more. And then if you're interested in volunteering, potentially going to visit ships, we work with the Seattle Seafarers mission to visit ships and kind of work through port security to do that as well. I just want to say a huge thank you for all of the work that you're doing and connecting the climate work to the plight of seafarers within that. Back to you, Stacey.
Thanks so much, Jess. I think it's it really is like when we have people that we don't get to see, that aren't represented in media, and there's just kind of that disconnect. It's so easy to not be aware of what's going on, and so just we're really happy to have you here to help everybody kind of see what's going on, and so we can help that solidarity. Let's go ahead and we'll go to our final presenter, Miranda with 350 Seattle Maritime Solutions.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to start sharing my screen here. And let's see. Somehow I'm sharing a Zoom board. That's not quite right. Let me try one more time. So yeah, also maybe just a good time to take a breath after that last presentation. I don't know about you all, but I am radicalized now. My goodness. Maybe we'll try slideshow. All right. So my name is Miranda Marty. I'm a co-lead of the Maritime Solutions team, along with our wonderful facilitator, Stacey Oakes. And if you're not familiar, 350 Seattle is a nonprofit grassroots organization supporting climate and environmental justice. And within this larger organization, the Maritime Solutions team really sees itself as largely a solidarity team, really recognizing that solutions in the maritime sector tend to come from frontline communities and from workers. So we try to mobilize our members and our resources to support identified solutions, as well as policy and system change. And as you can see from our vision, we tend to be pretty local, but the way that maritime policies and politics and regulations work, that tends to expand out to much larger systems, particularly international ones. So covering some things that we really dove into in this past year. One is maritime air emissions tend not to be counted. So this visual is from a presentation that we did at a conference. And that little red dot where Washington State is represents the airshed of what emissions actually get counted for the Puget Sound Maritime Emissions Inventory. That red dot is about 150 to 200 miles wide and tall. And when you see the blue line that goes to Yantian, China, which is our top origin port for cargo, it really puts into perspective that the system that we have to measure emissions does not match the needs of the moment for the climate crisis. Even so, right now, the EPA is basically taking that red dot and showing it to other ports around the country and saying, do you see that red dot? That red dot is like the best red dot in the world. You should go get your own red dot. And they're not wrong. That red dot is one of the best, but the best of an inadequate system, the best of a bad system is still a problem. And so we've also learned we're not the only ones concerned about that. Officials, even folks at the Port of Seattle are concerned about it. National leaders are concerned about it. Even shipping industry leaders are concerned about it. So we're looking to find a way so that we can all, kind of get our voices together and find points of pressure to figure that out. Also, we learned that ports in Washington state are mandated for economic growth, not job growth, not a lot of things you might think they are. And in grassroots spaces, we like to say people over profit. And it's important to recognize that Washington state law quite literally enshrines profit over people for port districts. And that has to guide the decisions that elected officials make. And so that's another kind of thorny problem for us all to solve. And through our partnership with the Pacific Coalition for Seafarers, we've also learned, just about their plight and how to better support those frontline workers. Some other things, education and advocacy. We've been talking to elected officials, to agencies, to other groups, to researchers, to advocate for improvements on a variety of things, including emissions inventories. We've been mobilizing public comment, and we've started some research projects, which none of them are quite ready for prime time yet, but in 2022, we're really hoping to have some educational materials. Part of our theory of change for this group is education to shift the narrative, and particularly helping raise awareness of the externalized costs of port, like how ports operate and how the maritime industry operates. So externalized costs like the impacts to climate and the environment, the impacts on workers and on communities that are living near ports. I also wanted to talk a little bit about our solidarity work and kind of partnerships, things that we do to uplift. So the Duwamish River Community Coalition, formerly known as the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, has been working for over 20 years for environmental justice for the Duwamish River communities. Eric, with the ShipItZero presentation, shared some extremely relevant slides about how South Park, Georgetown here in Seattle have lower life expectancies due to air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution. So in 2021, we joined many other organizations, including Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, to kind of uplift the DRCC petition to the EPA to preserve cleanup standards for the lower Duwamish Waterway Superfund site. In 2022, we're expecting to join another even larger mobilization around the East Harbor Superfund site, which is where the Duwamish meets Elliott Bay, because they are basically trying to roll back some of the promises that were made to the community about the standards to which they would be cleaning things up. Another group that we've had the good fortune to work with and share a member, Ray Dudicki, with is Share the Cities, and working on the city of Seattle's maritime and industrial use land use advocacy. So we just got word today that there's a new 45-day comment period starting. So if you're on our listserv, you'll probably be getting some emails from us about that. So on the map, that gray stripe that goes north-south, that's the land in the city of Seattle that is basically allowed to be used for maritime and industrial purposes. And there are a number of ways that we could see some real improvements there with this next iteration of the plan. As seen in the goals, eliminating some of just the known problems with zoning generally, that segregation is exclusionary. Also, identifying and resolving conflict points that undermine the intended use. I think one of the big questions, and if you're in the Seattle area, this might, once I tell you this, you'll see it and probably wonder thereafter, why are so many public storage facilities on our industrial lands? And why are big box stores on the land that's supposed to be used for maritime and industry? Like, is that really serving the city? Is it really serving maritime industries? It's a curious decision but under the current rules, they're allowed to be there. And then also, how can zoning plans change to better address the existential threat of climate change and the types of point source pollution that have created Superfund sites? So that's kind of an overview of the type of work that we're doing. And we love people to be involved in a variety of ways. If you want to get involved in like kind of planning and general management, we meet about twice a month on the first and third Tuesdays of the month. If you are maybe not a meeting person, but you enjoy research, those research projects I teased you with can always use more support. And if you just like to be on our listserv to get notices about like actions, updates, where a rally might be that you can attend, then yes, please go ahead and email Stacy and we can put you on that list. And I think that's everything I have. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Miranda. And thanks to all of our presenters. Actually, we'll just take just a moment. And again, just big appreciation with emojis and stuff in the chat for all of these presenters and great information that's been shared. Oh, thanks everybody. Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and transition to our kind of second part of what we're doing tonight, which is having a panel Q&A. So that means that questions you have for any of the panelists, we'd love to have them dropped in the chat. Is preferable, but if the chat doesn't work for you, you can use the raise hand function, and we'll help to get you to unmute when we get to you as well. And actually for this portion, I'm going to pass it back to Miranda, who's going to go ahead and kind of facilitate our panel discussion. And while people are typing their questions in the chat, I think we're going to start off with kind of a question that we had for all the panelists. So I'll pass it back to you, Miranda, and can help field some of the 350 Seattle Maritime Solutions questions myself.
All right. Well, one of the questions we wanted to start off with that is for all panel members is to invite you to share something from another presentation that inspired you today. So if you want to just take yourself off mute, if you want to raise your hand, I'm also happy to call on you as needed. Oh, Elizabeth, yeah. Oh, you're muted.
So both the ShipItZero, the fun and creativity that they put into their demonstrations, that was totally fun to watch it. Like, I'm so glad that they're doing that. And the climate action families, that was also very lovely to see the kids, telling it like it is and standing up for what needs to be done. I found both of those inspirational. Thank you.
Thank you for that appreciation. It's a collaborative effort. It's just an honor to get to work with many of the folks who are here in this Zoom webinar. I just want to express some deep gratitude to Jessica. My eyes are open and my heart is pained. It's hard to hear, really what's taking place. And I'm so grateful for you lifting up these stories. As heart-wrenching as they are, they need to be heard, and we need to do something about it. And we're really excited. You know, I'll take this back to, you know, other folks at ShipItZero. And I imagine our next Climate Action Families Youth Meeting, we're going to be talking about how, in what ways we can show up and join forces. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah,
May I jump in with the question about tail on, or that to follow up with Eric? Jessica, is the program to offer some donations to our seafarers a seasonal Christmas program? Is it a year-round program? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we kicked it off here in Seattle. So PCCS started originally in Portland and is slowly expanding. So we're just in our beginning stages here in Seattle. And then we're also expanding down to Oakland as well. And so we're actually planning to do it year round. So we started here in the holiday season because that's when people are giving. But the packages, the care packages that we're creating will actually be delivered throughout 2022. And so if you would like presentations in January or any of those different spaces, happy to do that. But I also wanted to admire you all for, I feel like I learned a lot as well. And so there's just so much opportunity for solidarity between what's happening in our port and the plight of seafarers within that. And so I think I was inspired by all the presentations, but I think just seeing how well that this network has like really worked to fight for what's right and fight for our earth, and then connecting that to the workers that are there that are not even aware of what's happening and how it's impacting their own health. I think there's just so many opportunities within that. So just wanted to share some gratitude as well.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely agree with that. One of my favorite things about this was the variety of angles from which maritime shipping was tackled. Like me and Eric kind of focused on the climate change aspect. Dr. Dooley, he focused on the port community health aspect. You focused on the, I guess like on the seafarers aspects. Not sure what to call it. And because of that, I learned a lot of different parts of this issue. And I'll say in terms of things that inspired me about it. Just a minor note, it was brought up in Dooley's presentation and another one, that Terminal 46 was put on hold. And it just gets me every time I see something that's like, there's something that we did that actually affected something, you know? Like tangibly.
Anne-Marie Dooley, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do want to just give you an opportunity if there is anything you'd like to share.
Yeah, I was just pretty amazed. I was really taken by, again, like everybody else, by the seafarers. A couple of questions rose to mind. Is one, how do they get healthcare when they're kind of stuck on a ship? And it also reminds me of the 1700s press gangs. I mean, they're not being knocked over the head with a bottle of beer and dragged onto the ship, but they're being kept on the ship. But how do they get healthcare?
Yeah, how they get healthcare is really disturbing. So they don't have access to healthcare because there's only 25 of them on the ship. So the captain, who's considered a representative of the ship itself, if somebody was having a heart attack, for example, would call and talk to a medical professional, and then the captain, either themselves, who is not certified to do anything and is not a doctor, a medical professional in any way, either administers, or they have to wait till they get to port, or they ask a seafarer to do it themselves. So basically they just don't get access to healthcare, and which is why it's considered one of the most dangerous shipping, like one of the most dangerous professions. I don't want to keep sharing horrifying stories, but I will say that when we started visiting ships here, it was one of the, and I think there was a question in the chat box. So we have been able to visit ships. So I'm going to answer that question as I tell the story. We have been able to visit ships. You need a specific card in order, you need a TWIT card, so similar to a longshoreman, in order to visit a ship. And we work with the Seattle Seafarers mission, who is very well known in the area. And so by volunteering through them as PCCS, we're able to gain access to ships. At the beginning, it was a lot of like us going out shopping for them. Like, so we would get orders ahead of time, go shopping at Costco. You'd be surprised, like we were bringing vitamins. Like people are like saying that it's like Seafarers, like when me and Miranda were doing some research, they were saying it's Seafarers lifestyles and why they're dying at such an early age. Like there's literally, it's some chaos what people are reporting. But I was out buying dozens and dozens of like giant things of vitamins to bring onto ships, because that was what Seafarers asked for within that. And so I think that's just really interesting. However, when the Seafarers mission was asked to come on board because there had been a passing, and there was 3 deaths in the Seattle port when we first started. When we first started volunteering, and we were a little taken back because we know that was a reality, but hearing about it and like actually visiting a ship and a crew that experienced that is a different story. And so within that, we're talking and learning and actually talking to the ITF inspector here locally, and he said it's actually a really positive thing when we're told that there's a death on a ship, because that means that they're helping to get the body home. In reality, and he used, quote, good shipping company, which then leaves you to beg, like, okay, well, then what happens when there's not a good shipping company? I mean, there's only a few answers you can think of, in which I'm assuming that, like, a body is overboard. I'm also then wondering, like, what is the family being told? Like, they're calling IMF, they're calling the International Maritime Federation to ask where their loved ones are. It's a risk going into seafaring, but just the fact that this is the reality. And many often say it's like due to some accident is how it gets reported. They don't actually say what happens. So I think when we talk about medical pieces and the rights and welfare of seafaring, just literally being, you said it was like not actually a city on its own, but it's an isolated island where the people that are actually on the ship don't have access or aren't able to fight for their own rights within that.
Thank you for sharing that, Jess. Yeah, and I'd also just as a panelist like to say that yeah, impressed certainly by everyone, but as someone whose first career was as a healthcare provider, seeing Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility in this space and, you know, kind of taking time to do testimony and to provide education on what often feels like just such a generally overlooked aspect of like public health, community health, like worker health is really great to see. So I wanted to get into some of the questions that I've seen dropped in the chat. This is from Bill Terrence, who says, for Erica and Jessica, and really everyone, I'm very concerned about how flag of convenience laws impact the ability to affect real change. Public officials are often unable to act, and these laws tie the hands of port officials and the entire industry. Is there a group working on the accountability for countries certifying these ships? So, Eric or Jess, do you want to start off? First one, then the other.
I agree, Patrick. I'm very concerned. The facts of inconvenience, that is why seafarers are able, that's one of the reasons why seafarers can be exploited the way that they are. There's no one that can be held responsible for it. And the way that the maritime industry works, the way the shipping companies and things work, it allows for this exploitation. And it allows for the exploitation to the point where that's why these shipping companies make so much money. Like, this is, if we're going down to like what the root of this is, capitalism and imperialism within that, the focus is on the profits within there. And so I don't personally know. I think as a coalition, we're new. We started just like a few years ago. I think that's the goal. Right now, we've been really focused on trying to make sure that we understand and are in solidarity with seafarers and really understanding what the plight is and understanding the on the ground conditions so that we can really build that educational awareness of those on land so that we can build up that coalition. But I think that's something that we're going to need to do internationally, but I'm not personally aware of anyone currently working on that.
Thank you, Jessica. And I just want to say personally, global solidarity. You know, there are communities who are impacted much terribly than others, but you know, we're all in this together, and we also have a responsibility, right? You know, these goods that come across our, the ocean, that going to a lot of wealthier countries, and we have a responsibility to take action and use whatever power we have. Yeah, those flags are convenient for exploitation and skirting accountability. And I'd love to, ask Miranda or Stacy, other folks from 330 Seattle Maritime Solutions, is there any insights that you have in your great research that you've been doing around this?
It's funny, I was actually thinking about Elizabeth and Seattle cruise control, because cruise ships being foreign flagged, I know that's been a big part of the Seattle cruise control campaign. So also just want to open the floor if there's anything Elizabeth wants to jump in with.
I don't have a simple answer. Our Congress changed a century-old law that was put into place that required foreign flagged ships to stop at a foreign port in between two American cities. And so up until a few months ago, the cruise ships that went from Seattle to Alaska had to stop in Canada. But Canada closed its ports to cruise ships during the pandemic for longer than the cruise ships wanted. And instead of saying, okay, the way to get around that is to flag your ships in the United States, meaning that you'd have to follow US labor laws and environmental laws and safety laws, the Congress that can't agree on anything just kind of instantly said, sure, no problem. Let's just change that law and foreign flagged ships no longer have to stop in Canada. So I'm a little discouraged about that. I would be certainly requiring cruise ships to be flagged in the United States would give us a lot more leverage over what goes on them. So if the Maritime Solutions team wants to look into that as a policy issue, I think that'd be great. Or I guess we could.
I know I've shared with Miranda before, but the U.S. isn't a part of the International Maritime Convention. We're not signed on to it. So even if PCCS were to find out that we can give an example from Portland actually, or Oakland. They found out they were visiting ships and they found a group of workers that were from Burma and just happened to have a volunteer who speaks Burmese. So we try to find volunteers that can come with us that can speak the home languages of seafarers, especially right now, because normally when they can get off the ship, we can have a real conversation of what's happening. When you're on the ship and the captain's around, it's a lot more difficult to actually understand what's happening. But if you bring somebody who speaks their home language, you're more likely to actually understand what's happening. In this case, they found out that their wages had been being held. They were being exploited, like their wages had been held for months. But the ITF inspector there, whose whole responsibility is to ensure the rights and welfare of seafarers, was like, okay, tell them that I can't do anything here. We can't force them to pay the workers back, but Canada can. So tell them to just hold on and wait because they're about to go port in Canada. So the ITF inspector there then was able to call Canada and that ITF inspector. And so when the ship ported, they arrested the ship and forced the company to release the wages and pay all the workers on the ship. And so I think eventually that's the goal, is to do more work like that. It makes it more difficult in the US, though. We've talked about what do we do to ensure that we can sign on to those international maritime conventions so that we can do things, because there's even officials that are trying to do what's right on behalf of seafarers, but having to build that solidarity and understanding the systems that are at play that are in opposition to the rights and welfare of seafarers.
There's another question that I saw come up in the chat. It was initially addressed to Jess, and I believe you did answer it in the chat about how to address mental health for those doing mutual aid work. And I also wanted to expand that because we've got climate action families on the call, and I think that's just always something that's top of my mind is mental health for young people facing the climate crisis. So I just want to invite you, Joey or Ruby, if you want to share any kind of thoughts that you have about how that's something that becomes part of your activism.
Yeah, a lot of what Climate Action Family has been doing, like I mentioned that a big part of the goal is to like teach youth how to engage in climate activism. A large part of it is also helping them not get, helping them deal with climate anxiety, both naturally and because like when we bring them in, we're dumping the thing on them. Okay, here are all the stats about why the world is doomed and you need to get involved. So after that, we kind of feel responsible for making, for trying to make sure people are okay. A lot of that has been, like it's climate action families. A lot of it has been getting parent support wherever possible, because honestly, the parents know more about how to help their kids than we do most of the time. But a lot of it is also just, just frankly providing a space of both reassurance and just a good social circle. Like a lot of the stuff we do are just fun events that are in some way related to nature. Like mountain hikes and stuff, and just to make who give people hard to put not sure how bad at words apparently. Holly. Hey. But give people some good memories, he's good things to think about, and remind them nature's still around, you know? So there's a fair amount more, but I don't know all of it. Rusty, if there's anything big I'm missing.
You're doing great, Joy. I think I can kind of summarize it by saying that mental health of our young people is very important, and we have to make sure we do not allow us as adults or the youth themselves to upon them shoulders take the responsibility of solving this climate crisis themselves. And so we attempt to do as much as we can, especially pre-COVID, and now COVID is really tough, but even now in our Zoom meetings, to have as much fun as possible and to enjoy the opportunity to be with one another, to do low tide beach hikes, to go snowshoeing, to see Joey out there, you know, having a great time years ago and snowshoeing and leading the group up the hillside. I mean, those kinds of chances for them to get connected with Mother Earth and to have that love for being in nature, we believe helps build their resilience to be able to fight the good fight that the promotion of climate recovery over the next few years and decades doesn't have an end in sight. And so we have to make sure an ongoing mental health resilient type of lifestyle is imparted. And so, and hey, we've had failures. We've had individuals, and any of us individually have had burnout. And we try to acknowledge that and say, hey, how can we do better? And how can we take a step back when we need to? So.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, taking a glance at time, I think that's probably all the time that we have questions, or all the, is that how words work? I think you know what I'm saying. we're out of question time. But thank you all so much. So I'm going to pass it back to Stacey to close us out.
Thanks so much, everybody, for both the great questions that everybody posed and the back and forth dialogue, and everybody, you know, kind of digging into all those good questions. That was a great panel. So folks can expect to get an email to the email that you registered to this webinar. We're hoping on Monday. So that's the goal, to get it to you by Monday. If you don't know how to save the chat or can't do that, don't worry about it. We're gonna have the links on how to donate to the supply drive, how to get in touch with the different groups, how to get on the listservs, all of those kind of things, so you can stay up to date with any and all of the groups that kind of caught your interest today. And again, Jess is willing to come and do presentations like longer of what she was doing today for other groups. So as we all saw tonight, once you hear about it, it sits with you, right? And you carry that with you. And so getting those presentations, I think, gets so many more people in the fight. So just a big extra push on that. So watch out for that email. We'll get you all ways to keep staying in on Monday. And the recording will be in there as well. So if you're one of the folks that didn't quite get here at the beginning, you can still watch all of it. And appreciate everybody that came here, that spent your time with us, that helped put this together, that helped promote it. And there's so many names that we recognize in the folks that showed up today too, that are big parts of all of the work that we all talked about doing. So just a big love to everybody that didn't speak, but that's clearly part of all this work. So appreciate it. Thanks for coming, everybody. And we hope to keep seeing you again. And then we do also hope to kind of follow this up, this idea of doing these multi kind of sectional webinars. We hope to do another one in a few months that's really focusing on specific solutions that are either happening locally or potentially happening, and just kind of take some deep dives into some different areas together in a few months. So we'll hopefully see you then too.